Welcome to Kiffin's Keep, an intellectual resource for the pillar and buttress of the truth, which is the church. This is a project of the London Lyceum, which is all about serious thinking for a serious church. I'm Jordan Stefaniak, president of the London Lyceum and host of Kiffin's Keep, and as always, I'm excited to be here today. And today, I'm excited to be here with a deeper voice because I'm getting over a sickness. So enjoy the pleasure of the liquid gold. I'm kidding, of course. For those of you who are new to the show, I do recommend and encourage you to go ahead and click the subscribe button to the channel so you can get all of our content directly to you and you can be reminded of it because we're creating all sorts of awesome stuff all the time, and that way you won't miss anything. And if you haven't already, go ahead and like the video if you like the content, if you appreciate what we're doing. We really appreciate that. That helps us spread good content across the YouTube sphere because you know what? To be honest with you, YouTube is full of mostly garbage. And so the more good content we can get out there, the better we can encourage and we can help people to not get convinced or sort of hoodwinked by some false alternatives. And lastly, do give a comment on these videos if you find them helpful. If you're listening on the podcast, go ahead and jump over to YouTube. And you can drop a comment if you agree, disagree, or if you think there's something we could talk about in the future further. Whatever else, appreciate the feedback. Now, on to the topic today. So I want to talk a little bit about the volume called Christian Platonism. If you're looking at this, it's edited by John Peter Kennedy and Anthony Hampton. Anthony Kennedy is I think he's an atheist philosopher. Now, this volume clocks in at a solid 480 plus 490 or so pages. So it is a solid behemoth, and 490 pages here from Cambridge is, with some decent typesetting here, is quite dense. This is going to be somewhat of a review video, or if you're on the podcast, podcast. However, when I do reviews, I don't just do standard, here's a summary, and then done. When I do reviews, the idea is to open up the topic. So come to all of these, whether you're interested in the book or not, because they open up topics I've talked about in the past. It was Robin Lloyd Poitevin's book on And Was Made Man, and we're talking about can atheists do theology? And in here, there's all sorts of questions about Platonism and what it means for the Christian faith and for those who are committed to creedal or confessional orthodoxy. So the book is sectioned off into three main areas. You have the concepts of Christian Platonism, and you've got a wide range of scholars here. You've got Lloyd Gerson, who is pretty prominent nowadays in the Platonism discussion. However, I had a discussion with an Aristotle expert, and he ironically said that he wouldn't trust Gerson for anything in the ancient world. He's more of a Neoplatonic scholar. Take that with a grain of salt, with whatever you have, because it seemed like he might have had an axe to grind, but it seems like I get a mixed reaction on Gerson's ability to articulate Platonism properly, though I'm not an ancient historian, so how would I know? I just know enough of having read the material myself and making judgments. But you also have quite a few other scholars in here. You have a second section on the history of Platonism, which I think is very valuable. You're going through just the early Christian Platonism, Christianity and late antiquity and Platonism, medieval West, Byzantium. You've got early modernity, and modernity. So you really going through the range of periods here. And then finally, you have some critical engagements of Platonism and sort of topics for today. So you have Andrew Davison talking about Christian Platonism and natural science. Andrew Davison is a brilliant man, a wonderful, wonderful heart. And he has two doctorates, one in, I think it's physics or chemistry or something like that, and the other in theology. So he's uniquely situated to give advice or wisdom on the natural sciences. And then you have environmental care, environmental crisis, really, art and meaning, value, dualism and materialism, Christian love and Platonic friendship. So you got a really nice set of essays in here. So if you have the ability, I think it's in paperback now. I might be misspeaking. If it is in paperback, I'll drop a link into the notes because I think it's a really valuable resource if you're interested in history, if you're interested in philosophy, if you're interested in theology more broadly, and how different philosophical schools impact or interact with Christianity. I think it's a very valuable resource. I think all the essays in here are well argued. I think some of them have some areas that could be cleaned up, some areas that I might disagree in, but on the whole, it's a very valuable volume. So I highly recommend it. I think for those interested in the subject of Christian Platonism, it is the best resource that you can have. Hands down, it is a fabulous resource. So go get your hands on it. I think it's really, really well done. The problems I have are primarily just with the nature of Christian Platonism and not with this volume. This volume is great. I think some of I don't know what I think about some of the application areas. I mean, it's always difficult when you get into some of those topics of like, how do I think about this stuff? And I'm not a ethicist or environmentalist by trade, so I can't really evaluate some of them in any real sufficient way. So maybe I'm uncomfortable with some of the things there, but it's a well-argued essay or essays. And so what do I have to say against it? I don't really have much to say in way of critique. I think it's a really fabulous essay or a series of essays in here. So what did I want to draw from this? I think there's a couple of things I want to draw from this. Number one, I think it's interesting that John Peter Kenny and Anthony Hampton open up the series of essays on Christianity and Platonism. And they talk about Christian Platonism as a culture of transcendentalism rather than philosophical or theological concept. And I think that sort of idea really infects the whole book. That is probably my one critique of it, is that its understanding of Christian Platonism as a conjointly put together term and not just two separate things is really fuzzy and really thin. And I've talked about this at length in different written formats. I think I've written an essay on the London Lyceum, I think it's which Plato, whose Platonism, and I've written elsewhere on the concept of Christian Platonism, and I think we recorded an old podcast episode. I think I did this on Christian Platonism. It's probably terrible, and the sound quality is probably awful because when we first started the podcast, I got the whole actually soundboard, big old soundboard I put on my desk while we recorded. I mean, I had a pop-up sort of desk. I had a desk, but I had a pop-up desk to help with all the equipment. And, you plug the XLR mics into it. And I had no clue what I was doing with the gain and all these different things. And I would screw things up. And I wasn't smart enough to test before we would record. So we'd end up recording whole episodes. And then I'd go back and listen and be like, I actually can't hear anything. And then we'd use all this bad sort of software. So it's probably, all that to say, it's probably bad quality. But if you go back, I've talked about it there. I don't know if I even agree with what I've said there, but I think the Which Plato, Whose Platonism essay, I'll link to that, is probably the best articulation of what I've tried to convey about Christian Platonism, because we did a whole series of essays on Christian Platonism last March. So it's been like a year and a half since we posted those. And I thought they were a nice series of essays. You had a wide range of thinkers, philosophers, theologians, historians, articulating, defending, explaining what they thought of the terminology of Christian Platonism and whether it was a necessary thing, whether it was a useful thing or not. And my biggest critique throughout all of this, including in this book, is I don't know what Christian Platonism means. And if all it means is a culture of transcendentalism, to me, the Platonism term is really not helpful. And the reason I don't think it's helpful is because you're adding on a term that most people have different baggage for. They have additional baggage. When they think of Platonism, they're thinking of 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different things in addition to transcendence. So why not, if all you want to do is communicate a culture of transcendence, say Christian transcendentalism or something like that? I don't know. Call it something that is not going to get all the baggage of Platonism. Platonism is a distinct philosophical school. Yes, in a sense, you could follow Gerson, I think. You can have a culture, an intellectual culture of sorts of Platonism, this sort of context and mode of thinking. That's true enough, but you have to do a bunch of qualifiers to explain what you're actually talking about and why you can strip off all these other traditionally Platonic beliefs when you're talking about Christian Platonism. Because I think what ends up happening is when I actually ask and press on what do you mean by Christian Platonism, at the end of the day, it's not Platonism, it's just Christianity. And so maybe some of these ideas were spurred on by Platonism or helped to be refined in the Christian tradition because of the dialogue along with along with Platonism. In that sense, there's a Platonist stream. But even then, it's just like, okay, so the origin of some of these ideas, not technically in the Bible, I guess they would say the ideas are latent in the Bible because, right, Plato read Moses and stole it or whatever. So all that to say, I just don't find the terminology all that useful. As a historical designator, I think it makes sense. So if you want to talk about origin, or if you want to talk about Clement of Alexandria, those are Christian Platonists. They are actually Platonists that are Christians. They're modifying, of course, as necessary. They're you got to affirm creation ex nihilo. That's a radical rejection of Platonism, core tenet of Platonism, but it's still a Christian Platonism, I would say. That's an actual Christian Platonism. So let me give you some examples. So there's several definitions throughout this volume. One of the first definitions, the editors themselves, they're talking about. I wrote this down. They give an elastic sort of definition, significant variances across history. Okay, they do suggest there's one constant thread throughout history, transcendence, or a commitment to a higher level of reality beyond the material world. Okay, but that a lot of schools of thought are committed to a higher level of reality beyond the material world. Lloyd Gerson, he says Platonism at its most basic means there is a distinct hierarchically arrayed subject matter irreducible to the material or physical world. So again, that's the same sort of thing. To me, that's not really like, why use the terminology of Platonism if all you're trying to communicate is that there's something beyond material stuff? Maybe Platonism really helped drive that idea home and was a big important factor in people saying, yeah, actually there is more than just the material. Great. That's good. That's not a useful term to say Christian Platonism as just a distinct sort of intellectual culture or school of thought, I don't think. Kevin Corrigan, he defines Christian Platonism as a sophisticated, critical, but sympathetic dialogue that thinks through the logic of language in relation to God, while freely acknowledging our inability to know anything about God's nature. That's pretty thin. John Peter Kenny, he suggests the unifying principles of Platonism are not its actual doctrines, but its shared intellectual style, textual canon, forms of discourse, and modes of personal formation. I think he's right that is a way to say this is what Platonism is in some sense. There is an intellectual style that's similar across. There is a sort of a textual canon of the material that you're engaging with and reading. There is a form of discourse. There is a mode of personal formation. But when you join that up and hook that up to Christianity, it doesn't really tell me all that much. I mean, the Christian Platonists of the Reformed Orthodox period are no longer Christian Platonists because they're not sharing this textual canon. They're not same form of discourse. So like it ends up to me falling apart. There's other definitions where it says, I treat Platonism as a historically and culturally contingent mesh of dynamic and diverse ideas, practices, and images, which can nevertheless be heuristically envisioned as a recognizable discourse. Okay. Lydia Schumacher defines it as there are as many kinds of Platonism as there are Platonists, and the meaning of the term ultimately breaks down. Even in this volume, there's an author in here in this volume saying the meaning of the term ultimately breaks down. There are as many kinds of Platonism as there are Platonists. What? Okay, so let's, in a historical sense, talk about Christian Platonism. Yes. In a theological and philosophical sense, stop talking about Christian Platonism and bucketing every single person in this Christian Platonism. If you're an Orthodox Christian, then you're in the good sense, not the Eastern Orthodoxy. That's a slam against the Eastern Orthodox. Maybe that'll get the YouTube views up. Kidding, but not kidding, but kidding. You get the point. What was I saying now? I just lost my train of thought. By the way, while I'm on this, I have thought about doing an episode sort of critiquing an Eastern Orthodox YouTube series of videos, including a book called Rock and Sand. I've gotten quite a few people who have been saying, I need a resource on Eastern Orthodoxy. If this would be, if you'd like me to do something like that, let me know. It takes a lot of work and time to create those sort of things, to do it well and do it appropriately and not make it a hot take. So if that's something you really want, let me know, because I've put together some stuff in this, But man, it's a lot of work. So if I'm going to put 20, 30, 40 hours into a video, I want it to actually be watched and to be shared. So let me know. Now, what was I saying? Okay, Christian Platonism, the terminology, if we want to use it in a way that it is this unifying factor of everybody who's an Orthodox, Nicene, Chalcedonian Christian, then I don't think it's a useful term at all. If you mean in a historical way, then yes, it's a very useful term, and I would say use it. Just be very clear in what you're trying to describe. I don't call all of Christianity, the great tradition, Christian Aristotelianism, even though I'm an Aristotelian. I think he's right in large measure. You have to use the Christian part to modify some aspects of it, of course. So I would really call myself like a neo-Aristotelian if you're up in sort of contemporary metaphysics and such. But the point is, I wouldn't call the whole entire tradition Christian Aristotelianism, even though I think that's the right way to think about things, because there you can have different various views. Now, I know a lot of the driving factor behind using the terminology of Christian Platonism and making it a hot topic is just you want to have a fancy term that kind of like angers the right people or whatever. And in that sense, like I get it, but that's not how we do theology. And I know a lot of this goes back to Lloyd Gerson's sort of Platonist thing. He makes this simple sort of device to say this is what constitutes sort of a classical approach to metaphysics and to the world. And if you depart from this, you end up losing pretty much everything that's near and dear to you as a Christian. And he gives these 5 sort of like negative principles where there's this anti-materialism, anti-skepticism, anti-mechanism, and there's 2 other antis. But they end up being like super, super, super broad, so that you could have process theologians under this Christian Platonist banner using Platonism. And fundamentally, it's a little bit ironic because they're not all metaphysical doctrines. Skepticism is not fundamentally a metaphysical doctrine. That's an epistemological doctrine. Okay, enough about Christian Platonism as a term. I don't think it's all that useful. Let's use terms that are clearer and more definable, because that will help us in our discourse and in our passing on and handing on the faith once delivered to all the saints. I think clarity is a virtue. Precision is a virtue. These things are helpful not only just for the sake of a generousness to the other, to not have to weed through a bunch of confused, convoluted things to get to what you mean, but it's also wise because decades go by, generations go by, centuries go by, and they're able to actually understand what you communicate and not have to do 100 dissertations arguing on what you meant and what you didn't mean. Just be clear. And therefore, long periods of time go by and people can come back to you and still find you as a relevant, useful source because you were very clear on what you meant. And you weren't sort of attached to a lot of the sort of trendy debates of the day, trendy terms of the day. Just stick with the good old time religion on these things. Now, I think that's primarily what I wanted to say regarding this volume. I think if you're super interested in the history, or if you are a graduate student of theology in some sort, I think this is a very valuable volume. If you're a pastor, I don't know that you really need to have this volume in your library. I don't know if you need to use your time and energy to read it, unless you're just really interested in the topic and you find it fun. It can enrich, I think, your preaching ministry in some respects. I think the last section especially gives you some creative ways to engage some contemporary problems. However, but beyond that, I mean, for the pastoral vocation, I guess I just have a very strong sense that pastors should be pastors. Their primary vocation is not a theologian in the true sense of the term. Their primary vocation is a pastor, to be preaching the word week in and week out, and to be ministering to individuals, and to be shepherding and leading them. And that takes a significant amount of time and sacrifice and effort. And I don't know if volumes on Christian Platonism are really going to aid those primary pastoral responsibilities and duties. So I don't know if that's a super valuable resource for a pastor, especially given the cost of it, though I think there's a paperback version, like I said, which would be significantly cheaper, though still expensive. So I would say graduate students in theology, it's probably useful. Graduate students in philosophy, definitely useful. or I guess philosophical theology is what I would say. Not necessarily philosophy, just straight up philosophy. Maybe the history of philosophy or the history of ideas. It would be useful. So I would commend the volume to you. I guess I would commend the volume as a very valuable, well done volume. The question is this subject material useful for you in your context? If you're a student and you're trying to go on to further studies beyond your master's degree, then it probably is of value if you are doing history of theology or philosophy, if you are doing philosophical theology, those sort of things. Even if you're doing New Testament studies, I think this would be a valuable resource to help you think about sort of the intellectual culture that's around some of the New Testament writings. I think it'd be valuable. Now, again, like I said, if you're a pastor or if you're studying things that are unrelated to this, it's probably not that valuable of a resource. You probably don't want to put your time into it, unless you just really have a hobby and want to know these things. So those are my takes on a lot of this stuff. I want you to read which Platonism, who's Plato, which Platonism. I think that which Platonism, who's Plato. Flip them, whatever. It doesn't matter. I'll link to it. Go read that. That gives you some of my more nuanced thoughts on this topic and this subject, talking about, I think, retrieval of the tradition and how we should think about Platonism in that, and then talking about sort of the naming conventions of Christian Platonism. Because I try to make a theological argument that naming is a significant undertaking, and it's a matter that we should treat with all due respect, and I guess we should treat with seriousness. We find in, I think, the scriptures, the Old Testament, the New Testament, naming has a significant function in the narrative of Scripture. You find the naming of the changing of the name of Abram to Abraham. You find the naming of particular individuals and figures and relationships as profoundly important. Adam is given the first task he's given is to name the animals and everything. So I think naming has significant theological importance. And so when we name even just theological concepts or theological schools or entire traditions, we ought to be very careful in how we do it. I think there's tremendous significance in it, and we shouldn't allow just simple polemical battles to determine how and what we name things. Okay, that's all for now. I appreciate you guys who are regular listeners or watchers for your patience. I missed, I think, three weeks in a row. I've been hard at work on a book manuscript, and I've been hard at work on a couple of other projects, including one massive project for the London Lyceum. So be on the lookout for that. It is incredibly exciting time around the London Lyceum. It's been a little quiet on the content production side, and that's because we've been hard at work on some things behind the scenes that we'll be excited to reveal here in the future. So I keep your eyes peeled for that if you're a regular listener. If you're watching this after the fact, go check out our website and you will find all the information about it. I'm pumped about it. I think there's an opportunity here as a relatively new institution to solidify ourselves as a long-term partner in producing quality content to serve the church at large. That is our whole goal, and our mission is to help resource the church, to help them to think seriously about topics, because we live in a time where we're given a lot of platitudes and a lot of weak answers. I grew up in a church context where there was not serious thinking. It was more about, like, how do you feel? We want to generate a particular feeling among people. We didn't want to create an intellectual culture of serious thinkers. If you start thinking and questioning things, then you're out. And so we think that the church actually needs real answers. We have real pressing problems, real pressing challenges, and we need actual people to say, you know what? I need to apply myself intellectually. It's not enough to create and to give these weak, limp-wristed answers. We actually have to think and put on our thinking caps, and we have to be serious about it. It's time we took things far more seriously, and so we want to create resources that are going to aid and resource that pursuit, and to also hopefully continue to do it in the context of an intellectual culture that's promoting, yes, serious thinking, but serious thinking includes charity and curiosity. It includes a virtuous disposition of honoring the other person and caring for them as a true friend, loving the other person, willing the best for them, and it includes those things. Okay, enough of me rambling about our future projects. I'm excited. I'm thrilled. I think there's the Lord has given us a real window of opportunity to create and to serve, and we want to do that. So we're giving everything we got to do it, and I'm excited about it. And I hope you partner with us, pray for us, continue to tune in to these things and share them, and to support us in any way you can. Anyway, I appreciate you all. Everybody, every single last one of you, for all the time that you spend watching these things. It's incredible that people watch these. I'm just shocked. But I'm not shocked, because you guys are craving for people who aren't going to give these platitudes. You're craving serious intellectual engagement with serious concepts, and you're tired of the just boring stuff. The stuff that's just the regurgitating the same old. There's no real robust engagement with the tradition, no real engagement with modern philosophy and context of these different things. So, yeah, pumped about it all. Stay tuned. Excited to be thinking with you guys soon. I've got a slate of topics here coming up that I'm excited to produce. But as always, the rest of the year is going to be a little bit like, I'm going to try my best to be consistent. But I got a little infant along with 2 young kids and lots of projects that we're trying to get up off the ground this year. So I'm going to do my best to stick to my hope and goal of getting like 40 a year is the expectation of these. But we'll see where we land. I appreciate you guys and look forward to thinking with you soon.